The golden lights of the charity gala sparkled across the massive penthouse like stars in the night sky. Rich people in expensive clothes walked around holding wine glasses, their laughter echoing through the rooms. This was not just any party. This was one of those events where billionaires came to show off their money, while pretending to care about helping others. Alexander Stone stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city below. At 32 years old, he owned one of the biggest tech companies in the world. His black suit probably cost more than most people made in a month. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his perfectly styled hair to his expensive watch that could buy a small house. Alexander was known for two things. First, he was incredibly smart when it came to business. Second, he had a mouth that often got him into trouble. He loved to argue and always thought he was right about everything. Tonight was no different. The charity event was supposed to raise money for music programs in schools. Alexander had agreed to host it at his penthouse, but not because he cared about music. He just wanted to look good in front of other rich people and maybe get some good publicity for his company. The problem started when the hired piano player did not show up. The event organizer, a nervous woman named Patricia, kept checking her phone and looking worried. She had paid a lot of money to bring in a famous pianist who was supposed to play classical music for the guests. "Where is he?" Patricia whispered to her assistant, trying not to let the guests hear her panic. "He was supposed to be here an hour ago." Alexander noticed the commotion and walked over with his usual confident smile. "Having problems?" he asked, though he did not really care. He just enjoyed watching other people struggle with things he thought were unimportant. "The pianist canceled at the last minute," Patricia explained, her face red with embarrassment. "His flight was delayed, and now we have no music for the evening." Alexander looked across the room at his pride and joy, a beautiful black grand piano that cost him $2 million. He had bought it not because he could play it, but because it looked impressive in his penthouse. To him, it was just another expensive decoration, like his rare art collection or his vintage car. "Classical music," Alexander said with a laugh that was not very nice. "Who cares about that old stuff anyway? It's just noise that puts people to sleep." Some of the guests nearby heard his comment and looked uncomfortable. Many of them actually enjoyed classical music and had been looking forward to the performance. But Alexander did not notice or care about their reactions. Patricia tried to defend the importance of classical music, but Alexander was already getting bored with the conversation. He had a habit of dismissing things he did not understand or care about. In his mind, if something was not making money or helping his business, it was worthless. As the evening went on, more guests started asking about the music. The party felt empty without it. People were talking and drinking, but something was missing. The beautiful piano sat silent in the corner like a sleeping giant. Alexander started getting annoyed with all the questions about music. He had spent a lot of money on this event, and people were complaining about one missing piano player. In his typical style, he decided to make a big scene that would get everyone's attention. He walked to the center of the room and tapped his wine glass with a knife to get everyone to listen. The conversation slowly died down as all eyes turned to him. Alexander loved moments like this when he was the center of attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in his loud, confident voice, "I can see you're all disappointed about the missing entertainment tonight." The room was completely quiet now. Even the waiters stopped moving to listen. Alexander gestured toward his expensive piano with a dramatic wave of his hand. "I have a challenge for everyone here. This piano cost me more money than most people will see in their lifetime. If anyone in this room can actually play this thing properly, and I mean really play it like a professional, I will marry them right here, right now." The crowd burst into laughter. They thought Alexander was just being his usual dramatic self, making jokes and showing off. Some people clapped, thinking it was entertaining. Others rolled their eyes, used to his outrageous comments. "I'm serious," Alexander continued, enjoying the attention. "I'm a man of my word. Anyone who can prove that classical music is worth my time and play something that actually impresses me, I'll put a ring on their finger tonight." More laughter filled the room. A few brave guests jokingly walked toward the piano, but they quickly backed away, admitting they could not play well enough to take on Alexander's challenge. The whole thing seemed like a game, a rich man's joke that everyone would forget by tomorrow, but not everyone in the room was laughing. In the back corner, near the kitchen entrance, a young woman in a simple uniform was quietly cleaning wine, glasses, and emptying trash cans. Her name was Isabella Martinez, and she was 28 years old. For the past 2 years, she had been working as a night cleaner in Alexander's building. Isabella moved through the party like a ghost. Rich people never really saw cleaning staff. To them, she was just part of the background, like the furniture or the paintings on the wall. She had cleaned Alexander's office many times, had even said good evening to him in the elevator, but he had never really looked at her or remembered her face. While Alexander made his grand announcement, Isabella continued working. But her hands slowed down as she listened to his words. When he mentioned the piano and classical music, something deep inside her chest started to hurt. Isabella had a secret that no one in this room knew. She was not just a cleaner who happened to work in a fancy building. She was a classically trained pianist who had once been considered one of the most promising young musicians in the country. As a child, Isabella had shown incredible talent for music. Her grandmother, who had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but dreams, had saved every penny to pay for Isabella's piano lessons. By the time Isabella was 15, she was winning state competitions and making music teachers cry with her beautiful playing. She had been accepted to one of the most famous music schools in the world, with a full scholarship. Her future had been bright and full of possibilities. She was going to be a concert pianist, traveling the world and sharing her gift with thousands of people. But life had other plans for Isabella. When she was 19, her father got very sick. The medical bills were enormous, more money than her family had ever seen. Her mother worked 3 jobs, but it was not enough. Isabella had to make an impossible choice: follow her dreams or save her family. She chose her family. Isabella gave up her scholarship and her future to work multiple jobs and help pay for her father's treatment. Even after her father passed away, the debt remained. Her mother was still sick, and Isabella needed to keep working to support them both. The piano that had once been her whole world became a painful memory. She had not played seriously in years, though sometimes late at night in empty buildings, she would find a piano and play quietly, just to remember who she used to be. Now, standing in Alexander's penthouse, listening to him mock the music that had once been her life, Isabella felt a mixture of anger and sadness. She watched him laugh with his rich friends, making jokes about classical music being worthless noise. If only he knew, she thought to herself. If only any of these people knew what real music could do, how it could make you feel like you were flying or break your heart into a million pieces. Alexander was still talking, still making jokes about his challenge. "Come on," he called out to the crowd. "Is there really no one here brave enough to try? Are you all going to let this beautiful piano sit here looking pretty but staying silent?" Isabella's cleaning cart had wheels that squeaked a little as she moved between the tables. The sound was barely noticeable over the conversations and laughter, but to her it sounded loud in the quiet moments between Alexander's words. She thought about her grandmother, who used to tell her that music was a gift that should be shared with the world. She thought about all the hours she had practiced, all the dreams she had given up, all the music that was still inside her heart but had no way to come out. The party continued around her. Rich people went back to their conversations about money and business deals. Alexander moved away from the piano, already forgetting about his challenge as someone started talking to him about a new investment opportunity. But Isabella stayed near that corner of the room, close enough to see the piano, clearly. It was beautiful, she had to admit. The black surface was so shiny she could see her reflection in it. The keys looked perfect, not a single scratch or mark on them. She wondered if Alexander had ever even touched those keys, or if the piano was just another expensive thing he owned to impress people. The thought made her sad and angry at the same. Thirsty as the night went on, Isabella continued her work, but part of her mind was somewhere else. She was remembering the feeling of her fingers on piano keys, the way her whole body would feel when she played a piece perfectly. the way audiences would go completely silent when she performed. She was remembering who she used to be, before life forced her to become invisible. The cleaning shift was supposed to end at midnight, but the party was still going strong. Isabella's supervisor had told her to. The party was slowly winding down, but Isabella's shift was far from over. She moved quietly through the penthouse, collecting empty glasses and wiping down surfaces while the rich guests continued their conversations about business deals and expensive vacations. Her mind kept wandering back to Alexander's challenge and the beautiful piano that sat untouched in the corner. Every time she walked past it, she felt a pull in her chest, like the instrument was calling to her. She tried to focus on her work, but memories kept flooding back. Isabella remembered being 7 years old, sitting on a wooden bench that was too high for her feet to touch the ground. Her grandmother, Abuela Rosa, had found an old piano at a church sale and somehow managed to get it moved to their tiny apartment. The piano was scratched and some keys stuck, but to little Isabella, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. "Mija," her grandmother had said in her gentle voice, "music is not something you learn, it's something you feel in here." She had placed her weathered hand over Isabella's small chest, right over her heart. Isabella's first piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, had been amazed at how quickly she learned. "This child has a natural gift," she had told Isabella's parents. "With proper training, she could go very far." And Isabella had gone far. By the time she was in high school, she was performing at competitions across the state. She remembered the feeling of walking onto a stage, seeing hundreds of faces looking up at her, feeling nervous and excited at the same time. But the moment her fingers touched the keys, everything else would disappear. The audience, the nerves, even her own thoughts would fade away, leaving only the music. She would become part of the piano, and the piano would become part of her. Her specialty had been Chopin. Something about the Polish composer's music spoke to her soul. The way he could make a piano sing with joy one moment and cry with sadness the next. Her teachers always said she had a special connection to his pieces, especially his ballads. Isabella paused in her cleaning as she remembered her audition for the music conservatory. She had played Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, one of the most difficult and emotional pieces in the classical piano repertoire. When she finished, there had been complete silence in the audition room. Then, one of the judges had started clapping, and soon the entire panel was on their feet. "Miss Martinez," the head judge had said with tears in her eyes, "in 30 years of judging auditions, I have rarely heard anything so moving. You don't just play the piano, you speak through it." That had been the happiest day of Isabella's life. She was going to study at one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. She was going to become a concert pianist. She was going to travel and perform and share her gift with audiences everywhere. Then everything changed. Isabella shook her head, trying to push away the painful memories. She focused on wiping down a table where some guests had left cake crumbs and wine stains. But even as she worked, she could not stop thinking about that piano. It was getting later now, almost 11:30. Many of the guests had moved to the outdoor balcony to smoke and get some fresh air. Others had gathered around. Alexander in his study, probably talking about business. The main room where the piano sat was mostly empty except for a few waiters cleaning up. Isabella found herself walking closer to the piano. She told herself she was just cleaning the area around it, but really she just wanted to be near it. The instrument was even more beautiful up close. The wood was polished to perfection, and when she looked at the keys, she could see they were made of real ivory, not the plastic keys that most modern pianos had. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then gently touched one of the keys. It made a soft, pure sound that seemed to hang in the air. The tone was incredible, rich and full in a way that only the most expensive pianos could produce. Isabella's heart started beating faster. It had been almost 2 years since she had really played a piano. She had touched a few keys here and there, when she was cleaning in other buildings, but never long enough to play a real piece. Her fingers itched to do more than just press one key. She looked around again. The waiters were busy in the kitchen area, and she could hear Alexander's voice from the study. laughing loudly at something someone had said. The outdoor balcony was on the other side of the penthouse, far enough away that they would not hear a quiet piano. Before she could change her mind, Isabella sat down on the piano bench. It was the perfect height, and the seat was more comfortable than any piano bench she had ever used. This was what money could buy, not just an instrument, but the perfect setup for playing. She placed her hands over the keys, not touching them, yet just remembering the feeling. Her hands looked different now than they had years ago. They were rougher from cleaning work, and she had a small scar on her left index finger from when she had cut herself on a broken glass. But her fingers still remembered their positions, still knew where each key was without looking. Isabella took a deep breath and began to play. She started with something simple, just a scale to warm up her fingers. The sound was incredible. Each note was clear and perfect, and the piano responded to her touch like it was alive. She could feel the vibrations through the bench, through her whole body. Muscle memory took over, and her fingers began moving more confidently. She played a simple melody, something she remembered from her childhood lessons. Then, without really thinking about it, she started playing one of Chopin's easier pieces, a waltz that had been one of her favorites. The music filled the room like water filling a pool. Isabella had forgotten how much she loved this feeling, the feeling of creating something beautiful out of nothing but her hands and her heart. She closed her eyes and let the music take her back to who she used to be. When she finished the waltz, she sat quietly for a moment, her hands still on the keys. She felt like she was waking up from a long sleep. This was who she really was, not just a cleaner, but a musician. The music was still inside her, after all these years. But then she heard voices getting closer. Alexander and his guests were coming back from the study. Isabella quickly stood up from the piano bench and grabbed her cleaning supplies, her heart pounding. She had to get back to work before anyone noticed what she had been doing. But as she moved away from the piano, something made her stop. Maybe it was the memory of her grandmother's words about music needing to be shared. Maybe it was the anger she felt at Alexander's dismissive comments about classical music. Maybe it was just the fact that she had been invisible for so long that she wanted just once to be seen. Whatever it was, Isabella found herself walking back to the piano. She could hear Alexander's voice getting closer. He was telling someone about a new business deal, his voice full of the confidence that came from never having to worry about money or failure. In a few minutes, he would be back in this room, probably making more jokes about classical music being worthless. Isabella sat down at the piano again, but this time, she did not worry about being quiet. This time, she was going to play for real. She placed her hands on the keys and began Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. This was the piece that had gotten her into music school, the piece that had made grown men cry, the piece that had once represented all her hopes and dreams. The opening notes were soft and mysterious, like a question being asked in the darkness. Isabella's fingers moved across the keys with a confidence she had not felt in years. She was no longer a cleaner pretending to play piano. She was Isabella Martinez, the girl who had once been destined for greatness. The music grew more complex, more emotional. The ballade told a story without words, moving from gentle melody to powerful drama. Isabella's whole body moved with the music, her shoulders swaying, her face expressing every emotion the piece contained. She was completely lost in the music when she became aware that the room had gone silent. All conversation had stopped. The adai, waiters had stopped moving. Even the sounds from the kitchen had died away. Isabella could feel eyes on her, but she did not stop playing. She could not stop. The music had taken control, and she had to see it through to the end. The ballade built to its dramatic climax, with Isabella's hands flying across the keys in passages that required years of training to execute properly. Her fingers had not forgotten the complex rhythms and harmonies. If anything, the years away had made her more emotional, more connected to the pain and beauty in Chopin's music. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, Isabella finally opened her eyes and saw the room around her. Every single person in the penthouse had stopped what they were doing and turned toward the piano. Guests who had been on the balcony had come inside. Waiters stood frozen with trays in their hands. Even the kitchen staff had emerged from the back rooms, and there, standing closest to the piano with an expression of complete shock on his face, was Alexander Stone. Isabella finished the final notes of the ballade, her hands trembling slightly, as the last chord faded into silence. For a moment no one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the city below. Then, someone started clapping. It was one of the older guests, a woman in an elegant blue dress who had tears running down her cheeks. Soon others joined in, and within seconds the entire room erupted in applause. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Isabella could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as Alexander stood in front of her, his eyes wide with shock and something that looked almost like recognition. But not recognition of her face, recognition of something deeper, something he had not expected to find in his perfectly controlled world. "I said I'm a man of my word," Alexander repeated, his voice stronger now but still shaky. "Anyone who could play the piano like that, I would marry them. And what you just did?" He paused, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I've never heard anything like that in my life." Isabella felt panic rising in her chest. This was not real. This could not be happening. She was a cleaning lady who had made a terrible mistake by drawing attention to herself. She needed this job. She needed the steady paycheck to help pay for her mother's medications and their small apartment. Rent. "Mr. Stone," she said quietly, using his formal name because that was how she had always thought of him. "I think you're just surprised. You don't really mean that." "Don't I?" Alexander asked, and there was something in his voice that made Isabella look at him more carefully. The other guests were watching this conversation like it was a movie. Some were pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Isabella could already imagine this moment ending up on social media, her face plastered everywhere as the cleaner who shocked a billionaire. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," suggested Patricia, the event organizer, clearly worried about the scene that was unfolding at her charity gala. But Alexander shook his head. "No. I made the challenge publicly, and she met it publicly. Everyone here witnessed what just happened." Isabella tried to step around him again, but Alexander moved to block her path. Not aggressively, but firmly. "Please," he said. "At least, tell me your name." "Your full name." "Isabella Martinez," she answered, wondering why that mattered. "Isabella Martinez," Alexander repeated slowly, like he was testing how it sounded. "How long have you been playing piano?" "Since I was 7, Isabella said automatically, then immediately regretted giving him any information. The less she said, the better. She needed to get out of this situation and back to her normal, invisible life. 21 years, Alexander calculated. "And you play like that? Where did you study?" Isabella felt cornered. All these questions, all these eyes on her. She looked around the room and saw faces full of curiosity and amazement. These people lived in a world where money could buy anything, but they had just witnessed something that no amount of money could purchase. Pure, raw talent, combined with years of dedicated practice and genuine emotion. "I can't do this," Isabella said, her voice getting louder. "I have to work. I have responsibilities. I can't just stand here playing games with rich people." The word games seemed to hit Alexander hard. His expression changed, and for a moment, Isabella saw something that looked almost like hurt flash across his face. "Games?" he repeated. "You think what just happened was a game?" "Wasn't it?" Isabella shot back, her fear turning into anger. "Rich man makes a joke about marrying someone if they can play piano, never expecting anyone to actually do it. And then when someone does, you act all shocked and surprised like this means something real?" The room was completely silent now. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Alexander stared at Isabella for a long moment. "You're right," he said finally. "I was making a joke. I never expected anyone to actually play." And I definitely never expected anyone to play like you just did. He paused, looking around at all the watching faces, then back at Isabella. But you did play. And it was not a joke. What you just did was real. It was beautiful and real, and he struggled for words. It changed something. Changed what? Isabella asked, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. I don't know yet, Alexander admitted. But I know I can't just let you walk away and pretend this never happened. Isabella felt trapped. She could see her supervisor lurking near the kitchen entrance, probably wondering why she was not working. She could see the other cleaners and waiters looking at her, with expressions ranging from confusion to worry. She was breaking every rule about staying invisible and doing her job without drawing attention. You want to know who I am? Isabella said, her voice rising with frustration and years of buried pain. Fine, I'll tell you who I am. Alexander nodded, and something in his expression encouraged her to continue. I'm Isabella Martinez. I'm 28 years old. I clean office buildings at night to pay for my mother's medical bills. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens that costs more than half my paycheck. I buy my clothes at thrift stores, and I haven't been to a doctor for myself in 3 years because I can't afford it. The guests were listening to every word, their faces showing various degrees of discomfort and surprise. This was not the kind of conversation they were used to hearing at fancy charity events. But that's not all I am, Isabella continued, her voice getting stronger. I'm also someone who was accepted to the Juilliard School of Music with a full scholarship when I was 19 years old. I won the state piano competition 3 years in a row. I was supposed to become a concert pianist. Alexander's eyes widened. Juilliard? But why didn't you? Because life happened, Isabella interrupted. Because my father got cancer, and the medical bills destroyed our family. Because someone had to work to pay for his treatment. Because sometimes dreams don't matter when people you love are dying. The pain in her voice was raw and real. Several people in the room looked down at their feet, suddenly uncomfortable with their own wealth and privilege. I gave up my scholarship, Isabella continued. I gave up my future. I got a job, then 2 jobs, then 3 jobs. I worked 18 hours a day to help pay for doctors and hospitals and medications that didn't even work in the end. Tears were forming in her eyes, but she was not going to stop now. She had kept this story inside for so long, and now it was pouring out. My father died anyway. But the debt didn't die with him. My mother got sick too. Different kind of sick, but just as expensive. So I kept working. I clean offices and bathrooms and conference rooms where rich people have meetings about making more money. Alexander looked stricken. Isabella, I had no idea. Of course you didn't, Isabella said. People like you don't see people like me. We're invisible. We clean up your messes and empty your trash cans and make sure your buildings are spotless, but you never actually see us. You're wrong, Alexander said quietly. I see you now. Now, Isabella repeated. Only now, after I played your piano and showed you that I'm more than just a cleaner. But what about all the times I've said good morning to you in the elevator? What about all the nights I've cleaned your office while you worked late? Did you see me then? Alexander's face went pale as he realized she was right. He tried to remember if he had ever really looked at the cleaning staff in his building. He probably passed Isabella dozens of times without ever really seeing her face. He started, then stopped. There was no excuse for that kind of blindness. So, yes, Isabella continued, I can play piano. I can play it better than most people you'll ever meet. But that doesn't change anything about my real life. I still have to work 3 jobs. I still have bills to pay. I still have to take care of my mother. What if it could change things? Alexander asked suddenly. Isabella stared at him. What do you mean? I mean, what if I'm serious about my offer? What if we got married and you never had to worry about money again? You could go back to music. You could play piano professionally. The suggestion was so absurd that Isabella almost laughed. You want to marry me because I can play piano? I want to marry you because you're extraordinary, Alexander said, and the sincerity in his voice surprised both of them. I've never met anyone like you. I've never heard music like that. I've never been so completely wrong about something in my life. Wrong about what? About classical music being worthless, about talent not mattering, about... He gestured vaguely, at the room full of rich guests. About what's really important. Isabella shook her head. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me except that I can play piano. Then tell me more, Alexander said. Help me understand. For a moment, Isabella was tempted. The idea of never worrying about money again, of being able to focus on music instead of cleaning toilets was incredibly appealing, but it was also terrifying. This is crazy, she said finally. People don't get married because of piano playing. People get married because they love each other. Maybe they could learn to love each other, Alexander suggested. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Without his usual arrogant smirk, he looked younger, more vulnerable. But he was still a billionaire who lived in a penthouse and made jokes about things he didn't understand. They were from completely different worlds. You don't understand, Isabella said. I can't just quit my job and marry a stranger. I have responsibilities. People depend on me. What if those people could be taken care of another way? Alexander asked. What if your mother could get the best medical care money can buy? What if you never had to worry about rent or bills again? It was a tempting offer, almost too tempting. But Isabella had learned not to trust things that seemed too good to be true. 3 days passed after the charity gala, and Isabella tried to convince herself that everything would go back to normal. She went to work at the cleaning company, did her shifts at Alexander's building and 2 other office complexes, and took care of her mother just like always. But normal felt different now. Every time she walked past a piano in a hotel lobby or heard classical music playing in a store, she remembered that night. She remembered the feeling of her fingers on those perfect keys, the sound of that incredible instrument responding to her touch, and the way Alexander had looked at her like she was something amazing instead of invisible. But she also remembered the reality check that came after. She was still Isabella Martinez, night cleaner. She still had bills to pay and responsibilities that could not be wished away by one magical evening of music. On Thursday morning, Isabella was finishing her shift at Alexander's building when the elevator opened and he stepped out. She had been avoiding him for 3 days, timing her cleaning schedule to work on different floors when he was usually in his office. But this morning, there was no escape. Isabella, he said, and his voice was different than she remembered, softer, less commanding. Good morning, Mr. Stone, she replied formally, keeping her eyes on her cleaning cart. Can we talk, please? Isabella looked around the empty hallway. It was 6 in the morning and most of the building was still quiet. I need to finish my work. It will just take a few minutes, Alexander said. And please call me Alex. After what happened the other night, I think we can drop the formalities. Against her better judgment, Isabella looked up at him. He looked different too. His usually perfect hair was a little messy, and there were dark circles under his eyes like he had not been sleeping well. What do you want to talk about? She asked. My offer, Alex said simply. I've been thinking about it for 3 days and I'm more serious than ever. Isabella felt her heart start beating faster. Mr. Stone. Alex. I told you I can't do that. You told me you can't quit your job and marry a stranger, Alex corrected. But what if it wasn't like that? What if we made it a business arrangement? A business arrangement? Alex pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. I had my lawyers draw up a contract. It's a marriage agreement, but it's structured like a business deal. You would get a salary, health insurance for you and your mother, and complete financial security. In exchange, you would attend social events with me as my wife. Isabella stared at the paper but did not take it. That's not a real marriage. It could become real if we both wanted it to, Alex said. But it doesn't have to start that way. It could start as a partnership that benefits both of us. What would you get out of it? Isabella asked, echoing her question from the gala. Alex was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I've been asking myself the same question. At first I thought it was just because I was impressed by your playing. But I think it's more than that. He leaned against the wall, looking tired. Do you know what my life is like, Isabella? I wake up every day in a penthouse that feels empty. I go to meetings with people who only talk to me because I have money. I attend parties where everyone is trying to impress me or get something from me. Isabella had never heard him talk like this before. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like loneliness. I've never met anyone real, Alex continued. Everyone around me is performing, trying to be what they think I want them to be. But when you played that piano, you were completely yourself. You were honest and raw and beautiful. I'm not beautiful, Isabella said automatically. You are, Alex said firmly. Not just physically, though you are that too. But your music, your story, your strength, it's all beautiful. And it's real in a way that nothing else in my life is. Isabella felt herself softening slightly, but she forced herself to stay practical. Alex, we barely know each other. We come from completely different worlds. Then let's get to know each other, Alex suggested. The contract doesn't have to be forever. We could try it for 6 months. If it doesn't work out, we part ways, but you keep the money and the security. Isabella looked at the contract in his hand. 6 months of not worrying about money. 6 months of her mother getting proper medical care. 6 months of not working 3 jobs just to survive. Can I read it? She asked quietly. Alex smiled for the first time since the conversation started. Of course. Isabella took the paper and unfolded it. The legal language was complicated, but she could understand the basic terms. Alex was offering her a salary that was more than she made in a year at all her jobs combined. He was offering to pay for her mother's medical expenses, their rent, everything. This is too much money, she said. It's not much money to me, Alex replied. And it's nothing compared to what you're giving up to marry someone you barely know. Isabella read through the contract again. It says here that I would have to live in your penthouse. We would have separate bedrooms, Alex said quickly. Think of it like being roommates who happen to be married on paper. And I would have to attend social events with you. Only when necessary, maybe once or twice a month. You would need some new clothes for those events, which the contract covers. Isabella tried to imagine herself at fancy parties, wearing expensive dresses, pretending to be married to a billionaire. It seemed impossible. What about my jobs? She asked. You would quit them, Alex said. That's the whole point. You would have time to focus on music again. Music? Isabella looked up from the contract. This doesn't say anything about music. Alex looked embarrassed. I wasn't sure if you'd want that pressure, but if you're interested, I could arrange for you to have access to piano practice rooms, maybe even performance opportunities. The idea of playing piano regularly again made Isabella's chest tight with longing. She had not realized how much she missed it until that night at the gala. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Of course, Alex agreed. Take all the time you need. Isabella folded the contract and put it in her pocket. I have to finish my shift now. Isabella, Alex called as she started to walk away. Can I ask you something? She turned back to him. When you were playing that night, what were you thinking about? Isabella considered the question. I was thinking about my grandmother. She's the one who taught me that music was a gift that should be shared. I was thinking about all the dreams I used to have. And I was thinking about how angry I was that you called classical music worthless noise. Alex winced. I'm sorry about that. I was wrong. Yes, you were, Isabella agreed. But I don't think you meant to be cruel. I think you just didn't understand. Help me understand, Alex said. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. If I agree to this arrangement, that's what you'd be getting. Someone who would help you understand things you've never had to think about before. I'd like that, Alex said simply. Isabella went home that morning with the contract burning a hole in her pocket. Her mother, Carmen, was in the kitchen making breakfast when she arrived. Carmen Martinez was 55 years old but looked older, worn down by years of illness and financial stress. Mija, you look tired, Carmen said in Spanish, her voice weak but concerned. I'm okay, Mama, Isabella replied, also in Spanish. They always spoke Spanish at home, a connection to their roots that Isabella treasured. Sit. Eat something, Carmen insisted, putting a plate of eggs and toast in front of her daughter. Isabella sat at their small kitchen table and watched her mother move slowly around the kitchen. Carmen's arthritis was getting worse, and the medications she needed were expensive. Isabella's health insurance from the cleaning company was basic and didn't cover much. Mama, Isabella said carefully, what would you think if I told you I might have a chance to make more money? Enough money that you could see better doctors? Carmen sat down across from her daughter, studying her face. What kind of chance? Isabella had always been honest with her mother, but this situation was so unusual that she didn't know how to explain it. There's a wealthy man who wants to marry me. Carmen's eyebrows shot up. Marry you? Isabella, what are you talking about? It would be a business arrangement, Isabella explained quickly. Not a real marriage exactly, but it would mean financial security for both of us. This man, do you love him? Carmen asked. I barely know him, Isabella admitted. Carmen shook her head. Mija, marriage is not a business. Marriage is about love and partnership and building a life together. But what if it could become that? Isabella asked. What if it started as an arrangement but grew into something real? Carmen reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. Tell me about this man. Isabella spent the next hour telling her mother about Alex, about the gala, about his offer. Carmen listened without interrupting, her face showing various emotions as the story unfolded. He owns the building where you work? Carmen asked when Isabella finished. Yes. And he never noticed you before that night? No. Carmen was quiet for a long time. This troubles me, she said finally. A man who doesn't see the people who serve him is not a man who understands respect. But he sees me now, Isabella said, and he seems to want to learn. People don't change overnight, Mika, Carmen warned. Rich people. 6 months had passed since Isabella and Alex's unusual wedding, and their arrangement had become something neither of them had expected. They were no longer strangers living in the same penthouse, but they were not exactly a traditional married couple either. They existed somewhere in between, in a space that felt both comfortable and uncertain. Isabella had her own room in the penthouse, beautifully decorated with a view of the city that still took her breath away every morning. Alex had kept his promise about the piano. He had bought her a smaller but exquisite grand piano for the penthouse, and arranged for her to have lessons with one of the best piano teachers in the city. Professor Mikhail Petrov was a stern Russian man in his 70s who had trained several world-famous pianists. At first, he had been skeptical about teaching someone who had been away from serious music for so many years. But after hearing Isabella play, his attitude had changed completely. You have not lost your gift, he had told her after their first lesson. If anything, the years away have given you more depth, more emotional connection to the music. We will work to rebuild your technique, but your soul for music is stronger than ever. Isabella had thrown herself into practicing with an intensity that surprised even her. Every morning after Alex left for work, she would spend 4 hours at the piano, working through scales and etudes and slowly rebuilding the skills that had once made her a promising young virtuoso. Alex would often come home in the evenings to find her still playing. He would sit quietly in his study with the door open, listening to her practice. Sometimes she would notice him there, and they would smile at each other, but they had developed an unspoken agreement that her practice time was sacred. Their relationship had grown in small, quiet ways. They had dinner together most evenings, talking about their days, their thoughts about music and business and life. Alex had proven to be a thoughtful listener, asking questions about Isabella's family and her dreams in a way that felt genuine rather than polite. Isabella had also met Alex's world, attending several business dinners and charity events as his wife. She had learned to navigate conversations with wealthy socialites and business leaders, always feeling slightly out of place but growing more confident each time. The other wealthy wives had been curious about her at first, trying to figure out where she had come from and how she had captured the attention of one of the city's most eligible bachelors. Isabella had learned to deflect their questions with grace, sharing just enough of her story to satisfy their curiosity without revealing the true nature of her marriage to Alex. But despite all the positive changes in her life, Isabella still felt like something was missing. The arrangement was working exactly as planned. Her mother was receiving excellent medical care, they were financially secure, and Isabella was playing piano again. But there was a careful distance between her and Alex that neither of them seemed willing to cross. They were partners, but they were not truly intimate. They were friends, but they were not lovers. They cared about each other, but neither had spoken about love. Isabella often wondered what Alex was thinking during their quiet dinners together. Did he ever regret the impulsive challenge that had brought them together? Did he ever wish he had married someone from his own world, someone who understood his lifestyle without needing to learn it? Alex, for his part, had been transformed by Isabella's presence in his life. He had become more aware of the people who worked in his building, learning their names and asking about their families. He had started a scholarship program for young musicians, though he had not told Isabella about it yet. But he was also struggling with feelings he had not expected. What had started as fascination and admiration for Isabella's talent had grown into something deeper and more complex. He found himself looking forward to coming home in a way he never had before. He loved listening to her practice, loved watching her face when she talked about music, loved the way she had slowly become comfortable in his world while never losing her authenticity. Yet he was afraid to risk what they had built by asking for more. The arrangement was working, and Isabella seemed content. He did not want to complicate things by admitting that somewhere along the way, he had fallen genuinely in love with his wife. The turning point came on a cold December evening when Isabella received a call that changed everything. She had been practicing when her phone rang and she almost did not answer it. But when she saw it was the concert hall where she had been taking lessons, she picked up. "Mrs. Stone," said the voice of Margaret Chen, the concert hall's artistic director. "I have an extraordinary opportunity for you." Isabella's heart started, beating faster. "What kind of opportunity?" "The New York Classical Music Festival is next month. One of our featured pianists had to cancel due to illness, and Professor Petrov recommended you as a replacement." Isabella almost dropped the phone. The New York Classical Music Festival was one of the most prestigious classical music events in the country, the kind of event she had dreamed of performing at when she was young. I don't know if I'm ready for something that big," Isabella said. "Professor Petrov believes you are," Margaret replied. "The performance would be Chopin's Ballet No. 1 in G minor. I understand that's a piece you know well." It was the same piece Isabella had played the night she met Alex. The piece that had changed both of their lives. "When would I need to decide?" Isabella asked. "The performance is in 3 weeks. I would need an answer by tomorrow." After Isabella hung up, she sat at the piano bench in shock. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of, but it was also terrifying. Performing at the festival would mean stepping back into the world of professional classical music, putting herself on a stage where she would be judged by critics and audiences who expected perfection. When Alex came home that evening, he found Isabella sitting at the piano, but not playing. She was just staring at the keys with a troubled expression. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. Isabella told him about the phone call and the opportunity. Alex listened without interrupting, watching her face carefully. "That's amazing," he said when she finished. "Congratulations." "I haven't said yes yet," Isabella replied. "Why not?" Isabella was quiet for a moment. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I'm not good enough? What if I've been fooling myself about being ready to perform professionally again?" Alex sat down on the piano bench next to her, closer than he usually did. "Isabella, I've been listening. To you practice every day for 6 months. You're not just good enough. You're extraordinary." "But this is different," Isabella said. "This isn't playing for you or Professor Petrov. This is performing for hundreds of people who know music, who will notice every mistake." "You didn't seem nervous that night at the gala," Alex pointed out. "Isabella, laughed, but it was not a happy sound. That night was different. I was angry and hurt, and I wasn't thinking about consequences. I just needed to play. Maybe that's what made it so powerful, Alex suggested. You played from your heart, not from your fear. Isabella looked at him. What if I fail? What if you succeed? Alex countered. What if this is exactly what you're meant to do? They sat in silence for a moment, both aware that this conversation was about more than just a piano performance. This was about Isabella's future, about who she wanted to be, about whether their arrangement had given her the confidence to pursue her real dreams. If I do this, Isabella said quietly, everything changes. How? If I start performing professionally again, I won't be just your wife who plays piano as a hobby. I'll be Isabella Martinez, the pianist, who happens to be married to you. Alex was quiet, and Isabella wondered if she had said too much. Maybe he preferred their current arrangement, where she was dependent on him and focused primarily on their relationship. Is that what you want? Alex asked finally. I think so, Isabella said honestly, but I'm also scared that if I become successful in my own right, it might change things between us. Alex turned to face her fully. Isabella, do you know why I fell in love with you? The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time either of them had used the word love. You love me? Isabella asked, her voice barely a whisper. I love you, Alex confirmed. I fell in love with you that first night when you played that piano like your life depended on it. I fell in love with your courage and your talent and your strength. If you think I would love you less because you're successful, then you don't understand me at all. Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes. Alex, I want you to do the performance, Alex said. Not because I think you should, but because I can see in your eyes that you want to. And I want you to have everything you've ever dreamed of. Isabella kissed him then, for the first time since their wedding day. It was soft and sweet and full of all the feelings they had been carefully avoiding for 6 months. When they broke apart, Alex smiled. Is that a yes to the performance? That's a yes to the performance, Isabella confirmed, and a yes to some other things too. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Isabella practiced even more intensively, working with Professor Petrov to perfect every note of the Chopin ballade. Alex arranged for Isabella to practice on the actual concert hall piano so she could get used to the acoustics and the feel of the